Greetings, this is Charles Darwin, and I'm here to talk to you today about the difficulty of predicting the future. As that great philosopher, science Yogi Berra once said, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Well, this actually lines up with some important evolutionary concepts, and that is historical contingency. It is possible to predict the general direction of evolutionary history, but it is difficult, if not impossible, to predict the exact form in which evolutionary adaptations will take place. So, for instance, during evolutionary history of the Earth, there's been an increase in cold and dry conditions. For instance, deserts. So it is possible to predict that, given the existence of mammals, that mammals such as the camel would have evolved, because under desert conditions the camel is able to store water. So one would predict that mammals able to store water would have evolved somewhere in the world. But the exact adaptations of camels, the fact that it was camels rather than some other evolutionary lineage of mammals that developed those adaptations, would have been impossible to predict. That is the concept of historical contingency. We could predict the general trends, but not the exact details. When I was in France last summer in Strasbourg, I was in a bookstore and I bought a copy of the Jules Verne novel, Jules Verne as we call him, Paris au XXe siècle. That is, Paris in the 20th century. Now he wrote this about 1865, somewhere around there. And he was writing, therefore, in the middle of the 19th century, predicting what Paris would be like in the middle of the 20th century. Looking back on it from the early 21st century, we can see that he got some things right, some things he missed a little bit, and other things he was way off. And that tells us something about the difficulty of predicting the future. Now, unless you are actually learning how to read French, I would not recommend that you get this novel. It was not accepted for publication during Jules Verne's lifetime, and I think I understand why it's not actually a very good novel. This by the same author who wrote 20,000 lieues sous les mers, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And that was such a great novel. Of course, I'm sort of biased because that was the novel that I was reading right at the time I was becoming aware of the ability of novels to express great ideas. So of course I'm a little bit biased. But then when I read this, I thought, that was the same guy that wrote both of them? This is so bad and that was so good. But anyway, this is a good example of the difficulties of predicting the future. Now, some things he got accurate. He predicted telegraph lines that would connect the various financial centers of the world. And that is in fact what happened. Also, he underestimated some things. He talked about the degeneration of music from its beautiful tonal form into an atonal form during the 20th century. But his example of degenerate music was Richard Wagner. He could not possibly have predicted the sort of atonal music that would have dominated academic music composition during the 20th century. Some of you may not even know about that. I'm not talking about jazz and rock. I'm talking about the academic forms of music that basically did not follow any tonal center. So he could not have predicted the extent to which his predictions were accurate. And then in some cases he was way off. He said that science would dominate everything and that the arts and literature would die away. So for instance, the only poetry that was available in 20th century France, according to Jules Verne's novel, was poetry that was based upon science and technology. For instance, a poem about the beauty of the oxygen molecule, Méditation sur l'oxygène. Okay, so he was wrong about this. This is what makes evolutionary history so interesting, is that we can predict the general trends, but we cannot predict the details. So this is a celebration of contingency and surprise in evolutionary history. This is Charles Darwin. Tally ho.